The rain hadn't stopped for hours. It fell in long silver streaks across the glass towers of the city, blurring lights into a watercolor of gold and gray. On the corner of 5th and Marlowe, traffic hissed like a living thing, impatient, snarling, alive with horns and engines. And through that noise, a man in a charcoal overcoat stepped out of a waiting Rolls-Royce. Elias Ward. The name that opened boardrooms and closed deals. A billionaire whose face appeared on magazine covers beside words like visionary, invincible, and untouchable. He walked fast, head down, umbrella tilted against the storm. His driver followed behind, carrying a slim black briefcase that held the signatures of 5 world-changing contracts. Elias didn't look at people, he looked through them. To him the world was divided into assets and distractions, until the distraction came in the form of a boy. A small soaked figure darted between cars, chasing something, a paper boat, half dissolved in the gutter water. The boy's shoe slipped. His shoulder struck Elias's side. The billionaire stumbled, just a fraction, just enough for his phone to slip from his pocket and clatter into a puddle. Elias's face darkened. "Watch where you're going," he snapped. The boy froze. Barely 10, hair plastered to his forehead, clutching the ruined paper boat in one trembling hand. "I'm sorry, sir," he stammered. "It flew away. I didn't see you." Elias bent, snatching his phone from the puddle, wiping the screen with his sleeve. "You didn't see me?" he said sharply. "I'm standing right in front of you." The boy's lower lip quivered. His jacket was thin, sleeves torn at the cuffs. "I didn't mean to make you mad," he whispered. The driver muttered something under his breath, probably about street kids. Elias didn't notice. He was too busy lecturing. "You think the street's your playground? You could have been killed." "Yes, sir," the boy said quietly. "I just wanted my boat." A gust of wind pushed the water around their feet. The paper boat lay crushed beside Elias's expensive shoes. The boy bent to pick it up, but Elias's voice stopped him. "Leave it! It's trash!" The boy looked up, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met, one pair full of cold irritation, the other full of something fragile, hope that the world might still be kind. Elias turned away, heading for the lobby doors. The boy's voice followed him through the rain. "Mister?" Elias didn't turn. "You dropped your wallet." The words didn't register at first. He was already inside, brushing rain from his coat, until the elevator doors began to close, and he looked down. His breast pocket was empty. By the time he turned, the elevator had already lifted him 40 floors into the clouds. The next morning, Elias Ward woke to headlines calling him the savior of Midtown. Another acquisition finalized. Another struggling company absorbed into his empire. Another day of perfect efficiency. He should have felt triumphant, but something small, almost insignificant, kept tugging at his mind. The boy in the rain, that voice shouting, "You dropped your wallet!" He checked his desk, no wallet, checked his car, nothing. Checked the lobbies lost and found, empty. His assistant, Mara, peeked in, tablet in hand. "Morning, sir. The Hong Kong partners are waiting on confirmation." "Did anyone turn in a wallet yesterday?" Elias interrupted. Mara blinked. "A wallet?" "Black leather. Silver initials. It's missing." "I'll ask security," she said, hesitating as if surprised he cared about something so trivial. When she left, Elias stared out the window at the city below. The storm had cleared overnight. Streets shimmered, washed clean. Yet he couldn't shake the image of that boy. The torn sleeves, the trembling hands, he told himself it didn't matter. He could replace everything in that wallet, cards, cash, IDs, within an hour. But it wasn't that. It was the memory of that small, soaked child calling out to him with honesty and being ignored. That afternoon, security footage arrived. Mara pressed play. The screen flickered to life, grainy black and white. There was Elias stepping into the lobby, brushing off the rain. Then, a minute later, a boy in a patched-up jacket running up, clutching something to his chest. He spoke to the guard, who barely glanced at him. Then the boy looked around, uncertain, waited by the glass doors for a while, and finally walked away. Elias leaned forward. Pause. The frame froze on the boy's face, young, tired, but determined. Where did he go after that? Elias asked. Cameras lost him 2 blocks down, Mara said. He turned into East Market. Elias rubbed his temple. East Market, one of the city's oldest, poorest neighborhoods. He sat back, staring at the still image on the monitor. Something in him shifted, almost imperceptibly. A feeling he hadn't felt in years. Obligation. He didn't know the boy's name. He didn't know why it mattered. But for reasons he couldn't explain, he wanted to find him. That evening, he told his driver to take a detour. East Market, Elias said. The driver hesitated. At this hour, sir. It's not exactly safe. Elias looked out at the fading daylight. Neither is losing your conscience. The Rolls-Royce turned down narrow streets, lined with flickering lights and corner stalls. The city that had once been numbers on Elias's spreadsheets now had faces, tired, human, real. He walked the alley where the cameras had lost sight of the boy. The air smelled of fried dough, smoke, and rain-soaked stone. A woman sweeping her doorstep looked up. Ma'am, he asked gently, have you seen a boy? About 10 years old, dark hair, gray jacket? She shook her head. Plenty of those around here, mister. Elias smiled faintly. I suppose so. He slipped her a few bills for her time and turned back toward the car. That's when he saw it. A paper boat caught in a gutter, the edges wilted from rain. He bent down, picked it up. Written in pencil along one side were 3 crooked words. Don't forget kindness. Elias froze. His fingers tightened around the soggy paper. That night, for the first time in years, Elias Ward couldn't sleep. By the 3rd morning, the paper boat sat beside Elias's coffee cup, dried, fragile, like a relic of something he didn't understand yet. He stared at it while his assistant briefed him on stock reports and investor calls, but the numbers sounded hollow, like echoes in a cathedral built for no one. When she left, he slid open his drawer and found an old photo, one the media had never seen. A picture of him, 20 years younger, holding a little girl with curly hair and a paper boat in her hand. His daughter, Lila. She died before her 7th birthday. Pneumonia. And no amount of money had been enough to keep her breathing. That night came back to him like thunder. The hospital corridor, the sterile smell, the nurse who'd placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You need to let her rest now." Elias had never forgotten the nurse's voice, though he'd forgotten everything else that mattered. Now, sitting in his glass office high above the city, he realized he'd spent a lifetime running from that voice, until the boy in the rain had brought it back. That afternoon, a message blinked on his phone. From St. Clair Memorial Hospital subject. Donation follow-up meeting request. He frowned. He hadn't made any new donation recently. Maybe his foundation had. He replied anyway. Hours later, he found himself in the hospital's waiting room. the same hospital where he'd once stood helpless as machines hummed beside his daughter's bed. The corridors looked newer now, painted soft blue, but the air smelled the same, antiseptic and memory. "Mr. Ward," a voice pulled him back. A nurse stood at the doorway. Gentle eyes, steady posture, tired smile. Her name tag read Mara Benson. For a moment, Elias just stared. He didn't recognize her face, but her tone, warm, patient, quietly strong, made something stir. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You've helped fund our pediatric wing for years. But this time, we wanted to show you something." She led him down the hall to a bright room full of children's laughter. Walls painted with clouds and kites. A corner shelf lined with paper boats. Elias froze. "Where did these come from?" The nurse smiled. "One of our young patients started making them. Said they remind him to stay brave." He turned, voice almost a whisper. "What's his name?" "Leo," she said. "He's new here, a kind boy. He came in a few days ago after an accident. Mild concussion, some bruises, nothing serious." Elias's chest tightened. "Does he live around East Market?" Her brows lifted in surprise. "Yes. How did you—" He didn't answer. His throat was dry. Through the glass window, he saw him, the boy from the rain. Leo sat cross-legged on the bed, folding a paper boat with careful fingers, tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth in concentration. He looked up, and his eyes met Elias's. Recognition flickered across his small face, followed by a shy, uncertain smile. Elias took a step forward, but the nurse touched his arm gently. "He's been through a lot," she said quietly. "Take it slow." Elias nodded, his voice low. "I will." That night, as he drove home, he couldn't stop hearing her name, Mara, the nurse, the same name as his long-ago friend, the one who had whispered comfort to him when his daughter died. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was fate. Either way, Elias Ward, a man who once believed the world was built on power, was starting to believe in something else. Elias returned to the hospital the next morning, earlier than anyone expected. The air was still cold with dawn, the halls quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the distant sound of a mop against tile. He carried something in his hand, a small box wrapped in gray paper, tied neatly with twine. He didn't quite know why he'd brought it. Maybe because he hadn't slept again. Maybe because he needed to see the boy, to prove to himself that kindness hadn't vanished completely from the world he'd built out of glass and steel. When he reached the pediatric ward, the nurse, Mara, looked up from her chart and smiled. "You're early," she said. "I wanted to check on Leo," he replied. Her eyes softened. "He's awake. He's been asking about you." Elias hesitated. "About me?" She nodded. "He told the other kids the angry man from the rain came looking for him. But then he said you looked sad. He thought maybe you needed a friend." The words hit Elias harder than he expected. He swallowed, forcing a small, unsure smile. "May I?" Mara gestured toward the door. "Go ahead. He's drawing again." Inside, the room was filled with morning light. Leo sat cross-legged on his bed, sketching with a pencil on hospital paper. His hand stopped when he noticed the tall figure standing in the doorway. "Hey, mister," Leo said, his voice small but steady. "You found me." Elias stepped closer, setting the little box on the nightstand. "I owed you that much." Leo tilted his head. "Owed me?" "You tried to return my wallet," Elias said. "You could have kept it, but you didn't." Leo shrugged. "My mom says we don't keep what isn't ours." Elias smiled faintly. She sounds like a very good mom. She's the best, Leo said proudly. She's working here today. She's a nurse. Elias froze. A nurse? Uh-huh, Leo said, nodding toward the door. Her name's Amara. The room tilted for a moment. That name. Not Mara. Amara. The woman who'd greeted him, whose voice had carried the same warmth he remembered from long ago, wasn't just a nurse. She was Leo's mother. And suddenly, the thread that had been quietly weaving through his life, the storm, the boy, the paper boat, the name, all of it came together in a single, breath-stealing realization. Your mother, he said quietly. Has she worked here long? Leo nodded. Since before I was born. She said she used to work in emergencies. She helped a man who almost died once. She said saving him made her believe that kindness always comes back somehow. Elias stared at the child, his heart thudding against his ribs. Did she ever say who he was? Leo shook his head. No, she said names don't matter. What matters is the life that got another chance. He turned the drawing around for Elias to see. A picture of a man in a suit holding a paper boat, standing beside a boy under an umbrella. At the bottom, written in crooked letters, were the words, Friends don't need magic, just kindness. Elias's throat tightened. He couldn't speak for a moment. Then he placed the small box in Leo's lap. What's this? The boy asked. Something that belonged to my daughter, Elias said softly. She loved paper boats, too. Leo opened the box. Inside was a tiny silver boat pendant on a fine chain, polished but old, the kind of treasure a child once carried everywhere. It's beautiful, Leo whispered. She would have liked you, Elias said, his voice barely audible. The boy's eyes glistened. Thank you, mister. When Elias left the room, Amara was standing just outside, watching quietly. She had heard everything. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she said gently, You've changed. He gave a small, sad smile. Maybe I just finally remembered who I used to be. Amara's eyes softened. Then, maybe my son helped you more than you realize. Elias looked through the glass window at Leo, who now held the pendant to his chest like something sacred. I owe him, Elias murmured, and I owe you. Amara shook her head. You don't owe me anything. I didn't even know who you were when I donated blood that night. He turned sharply. What did you say? She hesitated, then met his gaze. 3 years ago, there was an emergency patient after a car crash. Critical blood loss. I was the donor match. I never asked the name. Elias's heart stopped. That night, that accident, he had almost died. And the woman who saved him, the nurse whose voice he'd heard through the haze of morphine and pain, had been her. For a long moment, Elias couldn't move. The words hung in the air like the last echo of a gunshot. Quiet, absolute, impossible to ignore. You gave me your blood, he said, his voice breaking in the middle. Amara's expression was calm, but her eyes shimmered with something deeper than pride, a quiet acceptance of life's strange turns. I did what any nurse would do, she replied softly. We don't ask who's on the table. We just save who we can. Elias ran a trembling hand over his mouth, the past crashing through him like floodwater. He remembered flashes, pain, sirens, the sterile ceiling rushing above him, and that voice whispering, Stay with us! You're not done yet. He had always thought it belonged to a dream, but it hadn't. It was her. He looked up slowly, eyes searching hers. You saved my life, and I repaid you by yelling at your son in the street. Amara sighed quietly. People forget themselves sometimes. Life reminds them who they are when they're ready to listen. Elias stared at the floor, ashamed. I was cruel. You were lost, she said gently. Cruelty comes from emptiness, not evil. Outside the window, a pale morning light was breaking through the clouds, faint but warm. Elias exhaled, long and unsteady. I don't know how to fix what I broke. You already started, Amara said. You came back. He looked toward Leo's room, where the boy was holding the silver pendant, smiling at another nurse as he showed her his drawing. I don't deserve his kindness, Elias murmured. None of us do, Amara said with a faint smile. That's why it's called grace. They stood there in silence, two people bound by an invisible thread of fate. A debt neither could have predicted, paid not with money, but with mercy. After a while, Amara's pager beeped. I have to get back to work, she said. But, Mr. Ward? He turned. Elias, he corrected quietly. She nodded. Elias, my son forgave you the moment you smiled at him. Maybe it's time you forgive yourself. Then she was gone, her footsteps fading down the hall, leaving him alone with the sound of children laughing behind the glass. That afternoon, Elias skipped his meetings, something his board hadn't seen him do in 20 years. He returned to his office, but the skyscraper felt colder than ever. The marble floors, the endless glass, they no longer looked like symbols of success. They looked like distance. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at his reflection in the window. The man staring back didn't look powerful. He looked tired. On his desk sat the paper boat, the one he'd found in the gutter days ago. He picked it up, set it in the glass of water, and watched it float. The inked words blurred as the paper softened. Don't forget kindness. For the first time, Elias smiled. Not the practiced smile of a billionaire, but something human, fragile, almost new. He sat down, opened his laptop, and began typing. 2. St. Clair Memorial Hospital Foundation. Subject: Proposal for new endowment. Program: I'd like to create a scholarship and support initiative for nurses and single parents in healthcare. Full funding. Indefinite term. I don't want it named after me. Call it the Brooks Fund. In honor of the woman who gave me back my life, twice. He paused, hands trembling over the keyboard, then pressed send. That evening, as he walked along the river outside his penthouse, the city lights shimmered like 1,000 reflections of memory. He thought of Leo's smile, of Amara's calm voice, of the daughter he had lost, and the strange, impossible mercy of getting a second chance to be someone better. For years, Elias Ward had believed he could buy peace. Now he understood. Peace had to be given back. The next morning, the hospital's main lobby buzzed in quiet surprise. No reporters, no photographers, only staff gathered near the notice board where a new plaque had been mounted overnight. It read, "The Brooks Fund for the Mothers Healers and Dreamers Who Keep the World Alive." Founded in gratitude, inspired by kindness. Amara stood still before it, her hand pressed to her mouth. The letters shimmered under the morning light. For a moment, she thought it must be some administrative mistake. But then she saw the signature at the bottom. Elias Ward. She closed her eyes. Her heart felt full and fragile all at once. Behind her, Leo tugged on her sleeve. "Mom, did you make that?" She smiled through tears. "No, sweetheart. Someone made it for us." Just then, the glass doors opened, and Elias stepped in. No entourage, no flash of luxury. Just a man in a plain gray coat, holding a paper bag that smelled faintly of warm pastries. "Good morning," he said, his tone uncertain, almost shy. Amara turned, still struggling for words. "You didn't have to," he interrupted softly. "I wanted to." He crouched down to Leo's level and handed him the bag. "There's one chocolate croissant in there. I was told those are the best." Leo grinned. "You remembered." Elias smiled back. "How could I forget?" Amara looked at him for a long moment. The man who had once seen the world in transactions now standing before her, humbled, awkward, human. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Then don't," he replied gently. "Just know that it's not charity. It's balance. You saved me once without asking for anything. This is just the world coming full circle." Amara's eyes softened. "Balance doesn't usually come with scholarships and housing programs, Elias." He chuckled. "Then maybe it's time it did." Leo tugged on his sleeve. "Mr. Elias, can I show you something?" "Of course." The boy led him down the hall to his room, now covered with drawings of boats, stars, and cities floating on water. But one drawing hung higher than the rest. A picture of 3 people standing beside a river. The man, the woman, and the boy each held a paper boat. "I made this one for you," Leo said proudly. Elias blinked hard. "It's beautiful." "Mom says, when you give something good, it always comes back," Leo continued. "So if you gave us that big fun thing, maybe something nice will happen to you too." Elias smiled, the kind of smile that carried both sorrow and peace. It already did. He knelt down and looked the boy in the eyes. "You and your mother reminded me what being alive feels like." Leo tilted his head. "Were you not alive before?" Elias thought for a long moment. "Not really. I was just busy breathing." Amara watched quietly, her heart tightening at the truth in his tone. Outside, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, sending golden light spilling across the floor. It glinted off the silver pendant resting on Leo's chest. Elias followed its shimmer, then glanced toward Amara. "That pendant, it belonged to my daughter. But I think she'd be happy to see where it ended up." Amara's voice was soft. "I think she would too." The boy looked between them, smiling. "Can we all make a paper boat together?" Elias laughed, a sound that felt new in his throat. "I'd like that." They folded one from a sheet of hospital chart paper, the 3 of them leaning close, careful, focused, united in a quiet, human ritual. When it was done, Leo held it up proudly. "What should we write on it?" he asked. Elias thought for a moment. "How about, for the ones who still believe in kindness?" Amara nodded, her eyes glistening. "Perfect." The boy set the little boat on the windowsill, where it caught a beam of sunlight. It glowed like something holy. Later that day, as Elias left the hospital, he stopped at the door and looked back. Inside, Amara was helping a patient, and Leo waved from the hall. He raised a hand in return, his reflection merging with theirs in the glass. 3 lives once strangers, now somehow bound by something greater than blood or circumstance. For the first time, Elias didn't rush anywhere. He simply stood there, breathing, feeling the weight of the world and the lightness of forgiveness coexist within him. He had spent decades mastering control, wealth, power. But here, in this quiet hospital, he'd finally discovered something rarer: peace earned through humility. And as he stepped out into the sunlight, The city, that once looked cold and mechanical, now shimmered with life. Every passing face felt like a story. Every sound like a heartbeat he'd ignored too long. Months passed, and the world moved on. But Elias Ward did not return to his old life. He still wore his suits, still signed contracts, still sat in glass offices high above the city. But now there was something different in his gaze. A quiet steadiness, a warmth that no empire could measure. Every week he visited the hospital. Sometimes he read stories to the children. Sometimes he simply sat with Amara and shared coffee while Leo showed him his new drawings. The paper boats still lined the windowsills, small, fragile symbols of second chances. People in the city whispered that Elias Ward had changed. They said the ruthless billionaire had become human again. But those who knew him understood it wasn't a fall from power. It was a return to grace. Because in the end, wealth can build towers, but kindness builds bridges. And somewhere in that hospital, a little boy's voice still echoed in his heart. Don't forget kindness. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who still believes in humanity. And let's remind the world together that compassion never goes out of style.